Delegates and colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to make a few comments on this important issue of primary commodity export dependence, export diversification, and the international trade architecture. I'd like to emphasize two particular aspects of this issue that have been referred to already. And these are, first of all, that the question of primary commodity export dependence is a systemic one. And therefore, the export diversification ultimately is a question of structural economic transformation in the primary commodity export dependent economies. The second fact is the fact that the international trade architecture as we have today has exhibits a very important disconnect between the architecture itself and the kind of policies that are needed to address the challenge of primary commodity export dependence. And that disconnect serves to undermine some of the initiatives that African and other developing countries, which are primarily primary commodity export dependence, have taken over the past decades or so to address their problems. As has been said here, it is not just the fact that many of these countries export largely unprocessed raw materials that feed the industries of other countries. Equally important is the fact that these countries are nearly totally dependent on imported, manufactured and other industrial products. This essential unequal exchange between commodity countries and the rest of the world underlines some of the problems that these countries have, especially things like chronic trade deficits, balance of payment problem, in terms of trade losses, capital externalization of capital accumulation, and even crisis of debt. But equally importantly for those countries, this also means internally that the sectors of these economies are not linked together very well, and there's a stagnation of economic development, both in the rural economy and industry, and has problems for job creation. Now, the dynamics of this economic structure have been worsening over the past many decades, usually at the expense of the primary commodity exporting countries. One important development of the recent 20 years, which has complicated matters, is the growing financialization of the commodity markets and even commodity production itself. Hedge funds and other large speculative finance now are predominating in decisions in commodity trade, but also even on decisions that are made by commodity producers, whether in cocoa or coffee, but even more importantly, even in minerals and mining companies. As a result, we have a situation where trade and finance have become more interconnected and even more disconnected from the long-term imperatives of the real economy and conditions of production. Unfortunately, as experience has shown, the international trade architecture that we have today has only contributed to worsen this problem, starting from the structural adjustment policies of the World Bank and the IMF, which were imposed on many countries under debt conditionality. Many of these countries were forced to adopt economic liberalization and deregulation. And this meant that they have opened the economy to subsidize foreign products and more powerful transnational corporate investors. The effect has been decades of deindustrialization and the reversal of the many steps that African and other developing countries have taken to address the structural deficiencies of the economies that they have inherited from colonialism. The WTO and these imbalance agreements, as well as other multilateral and bilateral trade agreements, have locked this situation to space. For the past close to 2 decades, African and other developing countries have tried in a long struggle to address the imbalances in the international trade architecture. They are not very successful. In fact, it has been that the advanced industrial countries which dominate the trade system have been determined to keep these imbalances in place. In many instances, this determination by the advanced industrial countries to keep this in place have undermined interesting initiatives. In Africa, for instance, African governments adopted the African Money Initiative to try and provide a framework for African countries to begin to use minerals as a basis of economic diversification. A counter initiative was adopted by the European Union for the Raw Materials Initiative, which sought to keep African minerals available as raw materials for its players. This Raw Material Initiative, since last year in March 2023, has now been upgraded into the European Critical Raw Materials Law, which itself has many things intended to promote within the WTO and other trade areas policies which will keep critical minerals in Africa that African countries want to use, which have been mentioned as an important opportunity for transformation, to use them as raw materials for European industries. Now, in the light of this above, I'd like to conclude by drawing attention to three important messages that we have to take with us. First of all, we have to reframe the question of export diversification not simply as diversification of commodities or diversification of markets. True export diversification is a diversification from primary products to manufactured or industrial products. In Africa, this means a transformation which means enhanced productivity for smallholder agriculture and the diversification of rural economies, the development of manufacturing industry, and the rise of modern service economy. And all this must be part of an integrated and balanced national and regional and productive units, processes, and infrastructure. Secondly, such transformation requires that trade policies and other policies at the national and regional level must be seen as elements of industrial policy. Industrial policy that is rooted in a strategy for industrialization, which must align with many other policies, including technology, finance, and other infrastructure policies. Thirdly, there needs to be a fundamental rethink of the current international trade architecture as organized around the WTO, around the trade policies of the World Bank and IMF, and organized around many bilateral investment agreements, so that developing countries in Africa can have political and policy space to pursue the kind of development that they need. Finally, I think that all this means is that there must be a rethinking in a space that allows all the countries to put their ideas on the table so that we can reimagine a supportive and friendly international trade architecture that supports transformation. I think that the forthcoming International Conference on Financing for Development, FFD4, must take the lead in providing such a forum. I thank you very much.